In today's video, we're going to be exploring the possibility of a Montreal Canadiens prospect goalie trade. Have they been playing Cayden Primeau late in the season to showcase him for a trade, or evaluating their goalie of the future? We'll get a difference of opinions from different sources, plus we have some other updates from around the league, including some more prospect signings, some more injury updates, as well as another trade condition that's been completed, and lots of things that happened on this day in hockey history. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to cover today, but we do have some of this day in hockey history quick items to take a look at as well. It's a very interesting day when you take a look back. On this day, way back in 1988, Muriel Lemieux became the fourth player in NHL history to score 70 goals in one season. So obviously it's not something you see very often. I know Connor McDavid has already hit 60. He's got enough games left the way he's been on a tear. Around 150 points or so. Wouldn't be shocking if he hits that, but it's not something you see very often. Only the fourth player to do so. Back in 88, Super Mario, 35 years ago on this day, the Calgary Flames had Håkan Loob, the first ever Swedish player to hit 50 goals in the season. Of course, if you remember back, watching hockey back in the 80s, Loob was a pretty good player for the Flames, pretty consistent goal scorer, and the first Swede to hit 50 goals. Also on this day in 1976, Daryl Sittler became the first Toronto Maple Leaf player to hit 100 points in a single season. And all the way back in 2013, 10 years ago, we saw one of the most lopsided and worst trades in NHL history. May not have known it at the time, but the Washington Capitals traded Filip Forsberg to the Nashville Predators for Martin Erat. And Forsberg has gone on to be a prolific goal scorer and a consistent player for the Predators for quite a long time. I'm sure the Capitals would love to have a do-over in that one. Certainly a very, very lopsided trade. And when you look at the worst deals in NHL history, it often comes up in conversation. Of course, with some playoff updates around last night's action going into tonight as well, the Pittsburgh Penguins retook over the last wildcard spot with a big victory in Crystal Tang's game number 1,000 over the Philadelphia Flyers last night, so they leapfrog back ahead of Florida, of course, who was not in action. The New York Islanders also had a very costly loss last night in a tough opponent against the Carolina Hurricanes, but that's certainly made things a little bit tighter. Back a few games ago, I said the Islanders were very safe and were, probably really secure to make the playoffs. Now, I don't know. I mean, it's still in their favor, but at the same time, now they've got Florida and Pittsburgh only a couple points behind, so that's certainly not good news for the Islanders. They need to get their act together and pick up some much-needed points in the next couple games to make sure they secure their spot. Of course, we saw as well the Ottawa Senators had a very disappointing third-period blown lead again. Lost in overtime this time, though, so they only get the 1 point instead of 2. That 1 point is crucial. They're still technically in the mix, 6 points back of the Pens and Panthers, but that's a crucial point. They've only got 5 games remaining. They need to win out or to have any chance. And of course, they not only need to win, they need those other teams to lose a bit as well. So we'll see where things go. And it was a costly point left on the table by the Senators. Tonight, we could see clinching scenarios for both the Dallas Stars and the Minnesota Wild. Lots of injury updates and some signings. Injury at first news, the Montreal Canadiens today announced that Sean Monahan ended up having groin surgery, and he's obviously done for the season. No big shock considering the time of year it is. He hasn't played since December the 5th. You gotta wonder, really, if I really feel bad for Monahan. He was a terrific 30-goal scoring center consistently for a while before he started having various issues with his hips. Came into training camp with Montreal, was a fresh start, 1 year left on his contract. I think he missed the first little bit of the season because he wasn't quite 100% just yet. Started playing very well, was picking up some points, was getting interest in a trade considering he was in a final year of his deal. A lot of people thought maybe this guy could be one of the key deadline acquisitions for one of the contenders. Never happened because at December the 5th, he hasn't played since. Been out. Originally, they listed him as, I think it was like day to day, week to week. And here we are all these months later, season's over, and he's finally having groin surgery. So I wonder what the future honestly holds for Monahan. This is not what he was hoping for, not good at all, but we'll see. Another Canadiens player, Alex Belzil, who's an much older player, getting an opportunity late in the season and seizing the opportunity of that, is done for the year as well. He now has a fractured leg. So a lot of the injuries are piling up hardcore in Montreal, as we've discussed numerous times here. In the Minnesota Wild, another player who's battled through a lot of injuries to stay where he's at in the NHL, but Mason Shea, also done for the year. Another knee injury, another ACL tear. This is his 4th one in his career. He's had 2 on each knee. So that's terrible for Shea. I'm sure he'll likely try to come back, but it's going to be tough. That's for sure. I'm sure those ACLs are not in good shape, and it's a big surgery. So we'll see how he does and what this means for his NHL career. So players being reassigned to the minors for roster moves. The Penguins have reassigned Alex Nylander back to the American Hockey League. The Predators have recalled John Leonard, and the Dallas Stars have recalled defenseman Thomas Harley. We also see a couple of signings as well. The Florida Panthers have signed Ryan McAllister, who put up 49 points last season with Western Michigan University. He was an undrafted player, 21 years old, gets his entry-level contract. So the top line for Western Michigan, I believe, was all undrafted players, and they've all since been signed to NHL deals. So McAllister goes to the Panthers, and the Chicago Blackhawks have signed 2022 third-round pick Gavin Hayes from OHL's Flint Firebirds. He gets his 3-year entry-level contract here as well. Now, one other scenario that I didn't really realize, a lot of people didn't on the at the time last night, but of course we saw in the Maple Leafs Red Wings game, goaltender Matt Murray, which I talked about last night in the video, left the game injured fairly early in the game. He ended up having a collision with Lucas Raymond of the Red Wings, who was coming across and slipped and fell. Unfortunately, took the legs out from behind for Murray, who was paying attention to the puck in the other corner. It's hard to really tell when you watch the play. It doesn't look that bad, so I don't know exactly what the injury could be. Sheldon Keefe said he was tested for concussion. Didn't really say the outcome, though, so I don't know if it is that or not. Either way, he's out now, had to leave the game. Samsonov had to come in relief. You can tell Samsonov wasn't pleased. He looked tired. Obviously, he played the night before in a back-to-back. But the more interesting tidbit that nobody really knew until much later was that when obviously we know when a goalie gets hurt, that obviously every NHL building has an emergency backup goaltender, and the Maple Leafs have been involved with one of the more memorable experiences with that here in recent memory, of course, with David Ayres against their game against the Carolina Hurricanes a few years ago. And if they would have come to it that they needed an Ebug emergency goalie, again, last night it was actually longtime NHL veteran goalie and former Leaf goalie Curtis Joseph. He was in the building, seen with his gear bag. He was asked by some NHL reporters afterwards to confirm if that's why he had his gear and everything, and he confirmed via text to at least one reporter that he was indeed the emergency backup goaltender in that game. So that would have been interesting. He's been retired since I believe it was 2009, where he last appeared with the Maple Leafs. Certainly long-time great NHL goalie. That would have been an extremely interesting scenario should anything happen to Samsonov and he had to come into the game. But of course, we didn't know that at the time when the game was airing. And I was watching on TV. There was no mention of it, but obviously an interesting thing there that could have happened. Of course, another thing I want to touch on quickly as well is we know a few days back, it wasn't that long ago, that Connor McDavid hit 300 goals for his NHL career. Of course, this happened very recently. He was, one of the top 5 players to do it in the quickest amount of time. Took him 563 games. A lot of people have been making a huge fuss over the speed at which McDavid has hit this milestone. And certainly not to take anything away from him, it is a great accomplishment, and it certainly is a big feat. Obviously, McDavid, really this year has been quite the sniper and more of the goal scorer, but traditionally in his career has been very much a playmaker, pass-first kind of player, and has racked up way more assists than he has goals so far. But just as a comparison, another player is going to be hitting this target very soon as well. That's Leafs star Austin Matthews. I mean, Matthews and McDavid get compared a lot. Different kind of player. They play a different style, but obviously both big names, making big money, top guys in the league. He's actually sitting at 296 goals, and he's only played 476 games. So the only one, if he hits that anytime soon here, which you would think there's a good chance he could hit it by the end of the season, if not, pretty much real early next season. If he's only at 476, you think he's going to be able to be like 480, maybe 485. The only player that would have been quicker than him is Ovechkin. So that's certainly something to think about. I know, like, with all the fuss about McDavid and how he did it recently, when Matthews hits that milestone, it's really an even bigger accomplishment because he's done even faster course, like I said, overall, McDavid gets more points, a lot more assists than Matthews, so they're very different players. But just to kind of give you a comparison there, also, another Connor McDavid interesting tidbit here is that he could actually hit 1,000 points in his career as early as maybe late next year. I mean, he's on pace to, obviously this year over 150 points. If he were to duplicate that next year, then around this time next year, he could be hitting that milestone of 1,000 points because he's around 850 or so points now for his career. So imagine that. Connor McDavid, if you take a look at the history books, Wayne Gretzky's the fastest to ever get to 1,000 points. But of course, back in his day, things were even crazier, and he did it a lot sooner. I believe Wayne Gretzky was still only 23, not yet 24 years old when he hit that accomplishment. Of course, McDavid's if he would end up being around 27 in around 650 games, roughly by the time that is actually achieved. But if that's something that he accomplishes, he'll end up being the third fastest to hit that target, only behind Wayne Gretzky and Muriel. So the only reason for bringing this up is just to kind of give you an idea just how special some of these players are, like Matthews and McDavid. Very different players, but special in their own right. And some of the things that they're accomplishing right now really are remarkable and really are, things that are going to go down as some of the greatest of all time, for sure. Now, we saw Jonathan Quick traded at the NHL trade deadline shortly beforehand, and that trade had a condition in it, and that condition has now been satisfied, so we can update the what's going to be going back and between the two teams there. So Jonathan Quick, of course, was traded from the Los Angeles Kings to the Columbus Blue Jackets. There was also a first-round pick that went with Jonathan Quick in exchange for Gavrikov and Korpisalo. The condition on that first-round pick was that it's going to be a second-rounder unless the Kings made the playoffs, which I know was a likely scenario. Then it would be upgraded to a first. So they put that condition in just in case things didn't go well in the second half. They missed the playoffs. It could be dropped down to a second-round pick, and they would keep their first-rounder. But since they've clinched their spot now, that's now confirmed that their 2023 first-round pick will indeed go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now, as I mentioned as well, the trade scenario I want to talk about is Cayden Primeau in Montreal. He had a game the other day to play against the Philadelphia Flyers. The Habs announced today as well he's been recalled and will play against the Detroit Red Wings. Now, there's been a bit of a debate in Montreal media, kind of all spawned on by former Habs goaltender Jose Theodore, as kind of talking about the possibility, has he been called up as a showcase game because they want to consider trading him, that maybe they don't see him as a goalie in the future, or are they really just doing this as a chance late in the season to kind of evaluate where things are at with him at the NHL level and really kind of determine if they still feel he's the goalie in the future, or where do things sit? Of course, Primeau was looked upon as being a draft steal a number of years ago, being a 7th-round pick, kind of a freebie. Of course, he's a second-generation NHL player. His father, Keith Primeau, longtime NHL player, was not a goalie, however, but still, had a good, solid, long career. Cayden Primeau had a real good run with Northeastern University, playing U.S. college hockey before turning pro and signing with the Montreal Canadiens. If you take a look here, I'll show you his stats here on the side of the screen. He's had a good run. Like, overall, his NHL stats are not fantastic, but his college stats at Northeastern were really, really good, and his American Hockey League stats are pretty good. I mean, last year he had a pretty good solid playoff run with Laval. Otherwise, I mean, they may not be like jumping out at it as being like phenomenal, but there's certainly nothing to be too upset about. But his NHL stats are not great. But you got to remember, the last couple of years, the Montreal Canadiens have not been a very solid team, and some of the bulk of his games were played. Like, he's got 20 NHL games under his belt, where he has a 4.05 goals against average and an 876 save percentage. So in 20 games, that's not great. But 12 of those games came last year. Montreal was a terrible team last year. They were dead last in the NHL. Bad defensive team in front of them. That's not going to help matters. In a 4.62 goals against and an 868 save percentage. I understand that might be concerning, especially now that he's 23 years of age. But the team in front of you has a major part in your stats when you're a goaltender. It's just that simple. His American Hockey League save percentage and basically parts of 4 pro seasons is roughly average about 907, 908, which is not too bad. Obviously, like I said, last year he had a good run with the Laval Rocket, getting a little bit deeper in the playoffs. He had a 2.17 goals against average and a 936 save percentage, picking up a record of 9-5. So they went to the third round. So they had a chance to go a little bit further there in the playoffs, and things worked out, and he had a good run. He signed for 2 more years at $890,000, so the contract is pretty solid. Now, of course, it's a 3-year deal that he signed, and it's a progressive contract where his salary goes up each year. This year he's making like $770. Next year it's over $800, and then in the final year I believe it's $1.1 million. So certainly he's 23. He'll be 24 when next season starts. Theodore, who's now talking as a hockey as an analyst in Montreal, the former goalie, thinks that he's being showcased for a trade, and that maybe the Habs don't see him anymore as being a goalie of the future, which might explain why they obviously not only picked up Montembeault when they did, but decided to sign him and extend him, keep him around as well. So they still have Jake Allen, they have Montembeault. Primeau's basically their number 3, as we know. What do you think? Do you think he's getting an opportunity to play these final games to showcase him for a trade? Or are they really just doing some evaluating here to see where things stand? Personally, I mean, considering he was a 7th-round pick, his stats overall at other levels have been really good. He's still not to the point where I would give up on him myself. And with the contract he's got, you got to look at the deals here for the other goaltenders and say, well, at some point, we need to work him in here as this team gets better to see if he's really part of that solution or not. But, I mean, could he be dealt? I guess that's possible. I mean, Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon might be looking at this saying, he's going to be 24 years old. We're not confident in him being a regular NHL goalie as of yet. Maybe it's time we move on. Obviously, they were not the ones that drafted him. They might feel differently about him. I don't know. But it certainly seems like it's possible that Theodore might be on to something. But at the same time, I'm not entirely convinced that that's the case. If you analyze the whole situation, where they're at with the franchise, I'd be patient because, trust me, you've seen things like we've seen in Ottawa, for example, where Philip Gustafson was in a very, very similar situation. 23, 24 years of age, had 2-3 pro seasons where he was kind of up and down a bit. His time in the NHL was not the most consistent, but his other numbers beforehand were good. And then look what happened. They decided to treat him for a veteran guy in Cam Talbot this year. He's flourished in Minnesota, and Talbot has not done well, done very inconsistent. And Ottawa likely is going to be done after this season. So you got to be careful. And I don't know if I'm Montreal, if I'm doing that deal, but Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon might have something else up their sleeve. Do you think Theodore is right? Is he being showcased? Or has he just been given an opportunity so they can evaluate where he's at to see if he's still a goalie in the future? Let me know your thoughts on Primeau, and if a trade is coming, down in the comments, we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.